Are we witnessing the downfall of some of Asia's most vulnerable nations? As we enter 2025, economic turmoil, political instability, and climate disasters are pushing multiple countries toward collapse. From China's real estate crisis shaking the global economy to Pakistan's skyrocketing inflation, the warning signs are everywhere. In Sri Lanka, food prices have surged by over 50% since its debt default, while Myanmar's civil war has displaced more than 2 million people. Meanwhile, the Maldives faces an existential threat, with scientists predicting that 80% of its islands could be underwater by 2050. The clock is ticking for these nations, and today we'll uncover which ones are on the brink and why. So make sure to subscribe and stay tuned as we break down the 10 Asian countries most at risk of collapse in 2025. Number 10. China. China, once the unstoppable economic giant, is now showing signs of deep financial distress. The real estate sector, which once fueled its rapid growth, is now collapsing under massive debt. Developers like Evergrande and Country Garden have defaulted on billions in loans, leaving investors and homeowners in financial ruin. Local governments, heavily reliant on land sales, are struggling to maintain their budgets as the property market plummets. China's banking system, intertwined with real estate, faces mounting risks, increasing fears of a broader financial crisis. At the same time, the country's workforce is shrinking at an alarming rate. Decades of the one-child policy have left China with an aging population and fewer young workers to sustain economic growth. In 2023, the nation recorded its second consecutive population decline, with projections suggesting a continued downward trend. With fewer workers and a rising elderly population, the burden on China's social welfare system is becoming unsustainable. Meanwhile, political uncertainty continues to grow under President Xi Jinping's increasingly authoritarian rule. His crackdown on private enterprises and tech giants has stifled innovation, causing investors to lose confidence. The heavy-handed zero-COVID policies of 2022 exposed deep flaws in China's governance, sparking rare public protests across major cities. Internationally, China's aggressive stance on Taiwan and territorial disputes in the South China Sea have led to rising tensions with its neighbors and the West. The U.S. and EU have tightened trade restrictions, limiting China's access to advanced semiconductor technology. As global companies shift supply chains away from China, its manufacturing sector is losing its once dominant edge. With economic, demographic, and political pressures mounting, China faces one of its most uncertain periods in modern history. While the government maintains strong control, the cracks in the system are becoming more visible. Without major reforms, China's superpower status may not be as secure as it once seemed. Number 9. Pakistan. Pakistan is spiraling into one of its worst economic and political crises in history. The country is drowning in debt, with external liabilities surpassing $120 billion, forcing it to rely on repeated IMF bailouts. Inflation has soared past 30%, crippling the purchasing power of millions and plunging more people into poverty. The Pakistani rupee continues to weaken, making imports more expensive and deepening the financial strain. Foreign reserves have dwindled, barely covering a few weeks of essential imports, raising fears of a full-scale economic collapse. At the same time, political turmoil has engulfed the nation, creating a climate of instability and uncertainty. Former Prime Minister Imran Khan's arrest and legal battles have divided the country, sparking mass protests and violent clashes. The military, long the dominant force in Pakistani politics, is losing public trust due to its perceived interference in civilian affairs. Successive governments have failed to implement meaningful reforms, leaving the nation trapped in a cycle of corruption and inefficiency. Meanwhile, Pakistan's security situation continues to deteriorate as terrorist groups regain strength. The resurgence of the Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan, TTP, has led to increased attacks, particularly in border regions near Afghanistan. Tensions with India over Kashmir remain high, with cross-border skirmishes further straining diplomatic relations. Climate disasters have added another layer of crisis, making recovery even harder. Devastating floods in 2022 displaced millions, while persistent droughts threaten the agricultural sector, worsening food insecurity. Despite these challenges, Pakistan's leadership remains slow to act, relying on short-term fixes instead of long-term solutions. With economic instability, political unrest, and security threats mounting, the country is at a breaking point. Unless major structural reforms are enacted, Pakistan could soon face a collapse unlike anything seen in its modern history. Number 8. Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka is still reeling from its worst economic crisis in decades, struggling to regain stability. The country defaulted on its foreign debt in 2022, marking the first sovereign default in its history. With public debt exceeding 120% of GDP, Sri Lanka remains heavily dependent on IMF bailouts and international loans. Despite securing a $2.9 billion IMF package, the road to recovery remains long and uncertain. Inflation has eased from its 2022 peak, but remains high, making essential goods unaffordable for many Sri Lankans. Food and fuel shortages have eased slightly, but power outages and high living costs continue to frustrate the public. The economic collapse has left businesses struggling, and unemployment remains a major issue. At the same time, political instability continues to plague the nation. The ousting of former President Gotabaya Rajapaksa in 2022 brought hope for change, but corruption and mismanagement persist. Protests erupt frequently, with citizens demanding accountability from their leaders. The new administration faces immense pressure to implement reforms while balancing public dissatisfaction. Meanwhile, Sri Lanka's once thriving tourism sector has yet to recover fully. The 2019 Easter Sunday attacks, followed by the COVID-19 pandemic and the financial crisis, devastated the industry. Tourism, a key driver of the economy, remains below pre-pandemic levels, slowing the country's recovery. Environmental challenges are also mounting, with deforestation and coastal erosion threatening local communities. With limited resources and ongoing economic struggles, Sri Lanka remains in survival mode. The country's ability to rebound depends on effective governance, economic restructuring, and external support. Without real reforms, Sri Lanka risks falling into another cycle of financial and political crisis. Number 7. Myanmar. Myanmar is in a state of chaos, with its economy, government, and society unraveling since the military coup of 2021. The country has been trapped in a brutal civil war as the military junta struggles to maintain control against armed resistance groups. Widespread protests and violent crackdowns have turned Myanmar into a battlefield, with thousands killed and millions displaced. The military's oppressive rule has sparked mass defections, weakening its grip on power and fueling further instability. Sanctions from Western nations have crippled Myanmar's economy, leading to a mass exodus of foreign businesses and investors. The country's once promising manufacturing sector has collapsed, leaving workers unemployed and factories abandoned. The kyat, Myanmar's currency, has plummeted in value, triggering hyperinflation and making basic necessities unaffordable. Food and fuel prices have skyrocketed, pushing millions into severe poverty and worsening an already dire humanitarian crisis. Over 40% of the population now lives below the poverty line, with many relying on humanitarian aid to survive. However, international relief efforts have been blocked by the junta, leaving countless people without access to food, clean water, and medical supplies. Healthcare services are near collapse, as doctors and nurses who protested the coup were arrested or forced to flee. Meanwhile, Myanmar's geopolitical isolation has deepened, with regional powers struggling to mediate a solution. China and India, the country's biggest neighbors, continue to engage with the junta, but no real progress has been made toward stability. The lack of coordinated international intervention has allowed the military regime to maintain its brutal rule. As the war drags on, Myanmar risks becoming a failed state, with no clear path to peace or economic recovery. Unless a political breakthrough occurs, Myanmar will continue to spiral deeper into crisis, with devastating consequences for its people. Number 6. Bhutan. Bhutan, often praised for its unique approach to governance and sustainability, is quietly facing a growing economic crisis. The country's economy relies heavily on hydropower exports, with over 20% of its GDP coming from electricity sales to India. However, delays in infrastructure projects and fluctuating demand have significantly reduced revenue from this key sector. With limited industries and a small domestic market, Bhutan struggles to diversify its economy, making it highly vulnerable to external shocks. The nation's external debt has ballooned to over 120% of its GDP, raising concerns about long-term financial stability. Much of this debt is tied to hydropower projects, creating a situation where Bhutan is dependent on Indian financial support. At the same time, Bhutan is facing a demographic crisis as its workforce continues to shrink. A declining birth rate and increasing youth migration are depleting the country's labor force, affecting both economic productivity and social welfare. Many young Bhutanese leave for better job opportunities in India or other countries, leaving behind an aging population that needs greater government support. The education system is strong, but job creation has not kept pace with the rising number of graduates, leading to high unemployment rates. Meanwhile, Bhutan's commitment to environmental conservation has presented both strengths and challenges. As the world's only carbon-negative country, Bhutan faces growing pressure to maintain strict environmental policies. However, climate change has begun to threaten the nation's stability, with glacial melting impacting hydropower generation and unpredictable weather affecting agriculture. Despite its peaceful reputation, Bhutan's economic vulnerabilities are becoming more evident. While it remains politically stable, the combination of debt, an aging workforce, and economic stagnation poses serious risks. Without strategic reforms and economic diversification, Bhutan may struggle to sustain its progress in the coming years. Number 5. Afghanistan. Afghanistan remains one of the most fragile nations in the world, trapped in an endless cycle of poverty, conflict, and isolation. Since the Taliban regained control in 2021, the country's economy has suffered a catastrophic collapse. International aid, which once accounted for over 70% of Afghanistan's national budget, was abruptly cut off. As a result, the government has struggled to provide even the most basic services, leaving millions without support. Over 90% of Afghans now live below the poverty line, with food shortages reaching crisis levels. The collapse of the banking system has further deepened the economic crisis, making it nearly impossible for businesses to operate. Strict withdrawal limits and a lack of foreign investment have left Afghanistan with a cash shortage, crippling daily life. The Taliban's governance has only worsened the situation, as their strict policies drive skilled workers, businesses, and foreign organizations away. Their bans on female education and employment have removed half the population from the workforce, devastating Afghanistan's already weak economy. Meanwhile, security concerns remain high as ISIS-K and other militant groups continue to launch deadly attacks. Terrorist bombings, targeted assassinations, and internal Taliban divisions have created an atmosphere of constant fear. The country is also facing a worsening humanitarian disaster, with millions displaced due to violence and famine-like conditions. Severe droughts and environmental degradation have further reduced agricultural output, worsening food insecurity. Afghanistan's international isolation has only deepened, as no major country has formally recognized the Taliban government. With frozen foreign assets and economic sanctions still in place, Afghanistan remains cut off from global financial systems. Unless meaningful political change occurs, Afghanistan will remain in a state of crisis, with little hope for recovery. Number 4. Lebanon. Lebanon is facing one of the worst economic collapses in modern history, with no clear path to recovery. Since 2019, the country has been trapped in a deep financial crisis, with its currency losing over 98% of its value. Lebanese citizens have seen their life savings wiped out as banks remain paralyzed, refusing to release deposits. Inflation has soared to unprecedented levels, making basic necessities unaffordable for the majority of the population. The government's failure to implement economic reforms has left Lebanon stuck in a cycle of stagnation and decline. With public debt exceeding 150% of GDP, the country is running out of options to stabilize its economy. At the same time, Lebanon's political system remains in a state of paralysis. The country has been unable to elect a president or form a functional government, worsening the crisis. Sectarian divisions and political corruption have made it nearly impossible to pass necessary reforms. Hezbollah's growing influence, backed by Iran, has further complicated Lebanon's political landscape. Meanwhile, the refugee crisis has placed additional strain on an already struggling economy. Lebanon hosts over 1.5 million Syrian refugees, making up nearly a quarter of its population. Public services, including electricity, healthcare, and water supply, are on the verge of collapse. Hospitals are overwhelmed, doctors and nurses are leaving the country, and essential medicines are in short supply. The recent cholera outbreak highlights the severity of Lebanon's deteriorating infrastructure. With no international bailout in sight, the country risks descending into further chaos. Unless Lebanon undergoes major political and economic reforms, it will remain trapped in one of the worst financial disasters of the 21st century. Number 3. Bangladesh. Bangladesh is facing mounting economic and environmental challenges that threaten its stability in the coming years. The country's economy has long depended on its garment industry, which accounts for over 80% of exports. However, global demand for textiles is declining due to economic slowdowns in key markets like Europe and North America. Rising production costs, labor disputes, and increasing competition from Vietnam and Cambodia have further strained the industry. Inflation remains high, hovering around 9% in late 2024, eroding purchasing power and worsening living conditions for millions. The Bangladeshi taka has depreciated against major currencies, making imports more expensive and deepening the economic crisis. At the same time, political tensions are escalating, fueled by allegations of electoral fraud and government corruption. The ruling Awami League faces growing opposition, with mass protests and strikes disrupting daily life. Public dissatisfaction is rising due to governance failures, bureaucratic inefficiency, and crackdowns on dissent. Meanwhile, Bangladesh is one of the most vulnerable nations to climate change, facing a looming environmental catastrophe. Rising sea levels threaten to submerge vast portions of its low-lying delta, displacing millions of people. Frequent cyclones, flooding, and riverbank erosion have devastated agriculture, worsening food insecurity. Despite government efforts to implement climate adaptation strategies, the crisis is escalating faster than solutions can be implemented. Environmental displacement is pushing many Bangladeshis to migrate abroad, contributing to tensions with neighboring India. As India tightens border security, illegal migration has become a growing geopolitical issue between the two nations. With economic instability, political unrest, and climate risks converging, Bangladesh faces an uncertain future. Without decisive action to address these crises, the country could struggle to maintain its economic and social stability. Number 2. Laos. Laos is facing a deepening economic crisis, with soaring debt, inflation, and declining foreign investment threatening its stability. The country's debt has surpassed 100% of its GDP, much of it owed to China due to extensive infrastructure projects under the Belt and Road Initiative. These projects, including large-scale hydropower dams and railway networks, have failed to generate expected economic returns. As a result, Laos is struggling to meet its debt obligations, raising concerns about a potential default. Meanwhile, the Laotian kip has lost over 40% of its value against the US dollar, driving inflation above 25%. The rising cost of imports has made basic goods, including food and fuel, increasingly unaffordable for many citizens. Wages remain low, while the cost of living continues to rise, pushing more people into financial hardship. The economic crisis has also led to increased migration, with many Laotians seeking work in Thailand and other neighboring countries. At the same time, the government's crackdown on dissent has intensified, limiting freedom of speech and public protests. Criticism of economic mismanagement is being met with censorship, surveillance, and political repression. Laos remains heavily dependent on its hydropower sector, but environmental challenges are creating new risks. Droughts, unpredictable rainfall, and dam-related ecological damage are threatening energy production and food security. As demand for hydropower from Thailand and Vietnam declines, Laos is facing reduced revenue from one of its key industries. The country's economic and political challenges have led to declining confidence among international investors. Foreign businesses have started to withdraw, worsening Laos's financial difficulties and limiting job opportunities. With mounting debt, a currency crisis, and limited economic diversification, Laos is at risk of prolonged financial instability. Unless significant economic reforms are introduced, the nation could face years of stagnation and increasing hardship. Number 1. The Maldives. The Maldives, a tropical paradise known for its luxury tourism, is facing an existential crisis driven by economic instability and climate change. With 80% of its islands sitting less than 1 meter above sea level, the country is at extreme risk from rising ocean levels. Scientists warn that by 2050, many islands could become uninhabitable, forcing mass displacement of its population. Coastal erosion and saltwater intrusion are already damaging freshwater supplies and agricultural land, threatening local livelihoods. Frequent storm surges and coral bleaching have further destabilized the nation's delicate ecosystem, affecting fisheries and tourism. Tourism, which contributes over 30% of the Maldives' GDP, remains highly vulnerable to economic downturns and environmental disasters. The COVID-19 pandemic exposed the fragility of this dependence as visitor numbers plummeted, leading to severe economic losses. Although tourism has rebounded, the Maldives continues to rely heavily on external markets, making it susceptible to global economic shifts. Meanwhile, the country's public debt has exceeded 100% of GDP, with much of it borrowed for large-scale infrastructure projects. Massive loans from China and other creditors have left the Maldives struggling to manage its financial obligations. Debt servicing consumes a significant portion of the national budget, limiting investments in climate adaptation and social services. Political instability has further complicated governance, with frequent leadership changes and allegations of corruption. Rivalries between pro-India and pro-China factions have turned the Maldives into a geopolitical battleground. The government faces increasing pressure to balance environmental concerns with economic growth, a challenge that remains unresolved. Without urgent climate resilience measures and economic diversification, the Maldives faces an uncertain future. The nation's survival depends on securing international support, reducing debt reliance, and implementing long-term sustainability plans. If no action is taken, the Maldives could become one of the first countries in the world to be lost to climate change. So there you have it, the 10 Asian countries facing collapse by 2025. From economic freefall to political turmoil and climate disasters, these nations are on the brink of serious crises. But what do you think? Which country is most at risk? Do any of these nations have a chance to turn things around? Let us know in the comments below. If you found this video insightful, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into global issues. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.